3 years ago from Washington State. And that is my husband, Robert. He is not able to make it here today because he is rocking the farmer's market tomorrow in our hometown and couldn't be skipped out on. And that is my son, Malachi. He just turned 23, and he also moved to Missouri with us. And like I said, Fermented Homestead, you can find all kinds of cool stuff there. And I grew up as the middle of 3 children. That's my 2 sisters. I'm the one there on the right, the happy looking one. And this is me back in 2012 before I began my health journey. It started probably just about right after that picture was taken. That is me when I was probably about 300 pounds, horrible health, all kinds of terrible stuff. And this is basically how I got there. I did lots of fast food, prescription medicines, antibiotics. I smoked, I drank both alcohol and all kinds of stuff. Yo-yo dieting, you name it. That is how I landed in the position that I was in. Just terrible health. But then I decided I didn't want to keep doing that, so I did my research. And that research led me to a book called The Art of Fermentation by Sandor Katz. And if anybody is looking for an in-depth, all-inclusive how to ferment whatever you might have in your mind to do. Sorry, it's a little windy out. Can you guys still hear me okay? Sorry, I'll try and balance the wind noise. But this book is definitely one that you want to get. It is a fantastic resource. So, believe it or not, after I found fermentation probably about 10 years ago, I lost about 150 pounds. I then put off and on and off and on and off and on. And then probably about a year ago, it dawned on me that all of the times that I was doing good and things were good, it was when I was consuming a lot of ferments. And so I've been doing that for about the last year or so, and I've taken off a pretty good chunk of that again, and we'll just see where that takes us. That was me 1 year ago, right before I kind of decided that, all right, I'm going to keep doing it, and I've been doing it ever since, so we'll see how it goes. My qualifications come from the School of Hard Knocks. I got my master's degree there, and I got my doctorate from the University of Google. So, disclaimer, I am not a doctor, I am not a health professional, I am not a scientist, I am not a biologist, and I don't play any of them on YouTube. I'm just a geek with Google, so make sure that you guys are doing your own research. I am simply just sharing my experience, the research that I have done, so please make sure that you do your own as well. Nothing I say should be taken as medical advice. I have, however, had the privilege to hear hundreds of people's stories of ways that fermentation has changed their lives, as well as in addition to my own experiences. I have consumed ferments for about 10 years now, and I have made literally, not exaggerating, thousands of gallons of fermentations. I am very well experienced in fermentation, and that is where I gather my information to come in front of you guys. And that mostly comes from my fermentation business called Crunchy Cultures. It is a small, it's like a local fermentation company, maybe. Sorry guys, the wind is fierce. But if you guys are interested in it, you can try whatever you guys want to try. I have a booth over there. This is not like a promotion for that. It's just simply, if you're curious about fermentation, y'all can head over there and find out. So what you guys can expect today, I am going to be educating you guys a little bit of science behind the fermentation, as well as why you want to ferment. I'm going to be demonstrating how you can ferment, show you guys how quick and easy it is. And I want to inspire you mostly to consume fermented foods, because a lot of people know that they should, but they're not too sure why, and I'm going to share with you why. And as well as bust a lot of the myths and fears that stop people from consuming them or stop people from doing it, because it's a lot of fear behind it. And at the end, if we have time, hopefully we'll be doing a Q&A. You can ask whatever you guys want. So the number one things that I hear why people do not ferment is, I don't know why I should ferment, why I should consume fermented foods. It takes too long. What if it fails? To that I say, what if it doesn't? But also, oh well if it does. It's confusing, and I might die. That is, I might die is not exaggerating, the number one response that I get from people. They're terrified that they're going to kill themselves, or they're terrified that they're going to kill their family, you name it. So I'm here to dispel all of those myths, because I want everybody to be consuming fermented foods. So we are all bacterial, living in an antibacterial world. I do not mean that in the crawl down to the primordial ooze sense. I just mean we are more dependent on bacteria than you can possibly fathom. And so we're all told, don't get dirty, wash your hands, don't touch doorknobs, sanitize everything. go to the doctor, fermented foods are just rotten, and of course, more recently, stop the spread, 6 feet apart, wear a mask, stay home, antibacterial, everything, and in case all that's not enough, here, take this pill, you know. But what if I told you that all of that is actually toxic? It kills everything, even the good guys who you need to function, and most bacteria are actually our friends. We need them, we require them, we cannot function without them. So what I say is make mud pies, garden without gloves, go barefoot, don't scrub your garden veggies, trade out the poison for more reasonable options, get out in the sunshine directly on your skin, unobstructed, maybe rinse off in the shower every once in a while instead of scrubbing it all off, and maybe even lick a doorknob. You might think I'm joking, but I've done it. And build your immune system from the inside out. One thing that's actually kind of interesting, I'm the opposite of a germaphobe. The only thing that gets me all germophobia is poo, like actually touching it. I'm actually obsessed with talking about it. But my husband is the opposite. He's a little bit of OCD. So every once in a while when he kind of gets a little bit in his moment, he's like, I just lick his hand and it fixes it. It fixes it, I'm not kidding, it's weird, but it works. So I encourage you guys to let bacteria create a healthy ecosystem in your body, on your skin, in your animal pens, your gardens, your kitchens, everywhere. The key to it is just nurturing the environment that the good bacteria need and not creating an environment that the bad bacteria, I don't know how to say that, but create an environment for the good guys. So there is an invisible war that is happening all around us, and it is the war of beneficial versus pathogenic bacteria. It is a very big, important war, and one that is really not hard to win. It really isn't. It's very easy. Bacteria double in every 20 minutes, and in ideal conditions, I should say that. So you just create the conditions that are good for the good guys, those guys will dominate, and then you win. I got bored one night and created this. This is basically, if you start out with one bacteria, it takes 10 hours to reach 1 billion. It proliferates more quickly than you can possibly fathom. Why do the numbers matter? It's because there are strength in numbers. If you have a high number of beneficial bacteria that are residing in your skin, in your home, in your body, it creates an environment that the bad guys just cannot survive in. The good guys create their own beneficial environment. It's really fascinating. But that's why the numbers really matter, because you need really high numbers. If you're going to war, you need an army, not a soldier. You know what I'm saying? So give it the environment that the good guys can win. And that's why you hear all of those millions and billions and trillions and all of these massive numbers when it comes to bacteria, because that is what is required for it to happen. I thought that this was really interesting. Anybody, probably most people in here have heard of Dr. Mercola. He actually sent a jar of homemade sauerkraut to a lab and had it tested. And he found that a 4 to 6 ounce serving of homemade sauerkraut had 10 trillion bacteria in it. Just a teeny little cup, a quarter of this. So that basically means that 4 to 6 ounce serving had, sorry, I'm trying not to shiver here, y'all, I'm freezing. It had more probiotics in that 4 ounce container, that's a half a cup, more than 100 count probiotics. You buy a 100 count probiotic bottle in the store, you're looking at probably $30 to $35. And then an entire one of these had enough for 8 probiotic bottles. One of these little guys, you can get it for like $10. As opposed to, can you imagine how much that is? And what I like about the sauerkrauts and the kimchis and all of the homemade fermented stuff is that you have the diversity of bacteria. When you buy a probiotic bottle, you might get like 3 or 4 different strains. They're all lab created, but these are ones that are made to digest your food because it's already started to digest the food. So you're inoculating your body with what it needs to digest future food. So, beneficial bacteria thrive in a salty, acidic, airless environment. Those first 2 are exclusive to beneficial bacteria. The last one, the airless environment, both beneficial and pathogenic can survive there. But the acidity and the saltiness is very important. And this environment is death to pathogenic bacteria, which I'm going to show you right here. The handy dandy red line right here, this is pulled from the FDA website. I just copied and pasted it and highlighted the important parts. But this is a pH, is the acidity level. It goes from 0 to 14, 7 is in the middle. Anything under that, it just goes from 0 to 7, right? Anything, it goes in reverse. You have to think about it in the opposites. It's kind of confusing. But basically, the lowest pH level that any pathogenic bacteria, according to this website, can survive is the one that you probably can't see down here at 3.7. Any fermented food that you consume is going to be well under 3.5. Nobody's going to sell anything that's above 3.5. Anything that I sell is usually under 3.2. So that means no pathogenic bacteria can survive in that environment. It's literally impossible. So what is fermentation? We're talking a little bit about the benefits of it, but let's go ahead and talk about what it actually is. The boring version is fermentation is a metabolic process in organisms that converts carbohydrates into chemical energy without requiring oxygen. If you look up on the dictionary, that's the definition you're probably going to get. But basically that just means that the bacteria, yeast, and enzymes use carbohydrates or sugar that are naturally present in the vegetables to fuel their growth and reproduction, turning them into their byproducts. Most notably are acids and more of themselves. They just duplicate. Why should we ferment foods? I say it's for flavor, digestibility, and bioavailability. Flavor, this is not a Rolling Stones poster. This is actually a map of the taste buds on your tongue. There are different areas on your tongue. There's bitter, sour, sweet, salty, and umami. And fermented foods actually meet at least 3 of those. 4 of them if you have something a little bit sweet. But the umami right there in the center it's like the savoriness. It's things that you can only get through like meat, and fermented foods are very high in umami factor. It comes from a particular amino acid. I could go into it, but I'm not going to. But basically, the way that your tongue receives the flavor is why it's so flavorful and why it's so, for lack of a better term, addicting. It really is addicting. Once you get started eating fermented foods, you literally can't consume a meal without it because it's just so delicious. As me, I consume probably about half of this jar in one sitting. My husband does the same thing. We go through a lot of ferments. The next 2 reasons are digestibility and bioavailability. The reason that it is makes things more bioavailable, I'm really cold, so I'm really trying here, y'all. There are certain things called anti-nutrients. We've all heard about anti-nutrients. What are they? They are certain things that are in foods, particularly vegetables, particularly plant matter, it makes it really bad for you in high amounts. Some of them are perfectly fine, if not even beneficial in small amounts, but once you get a lot of them, they can be really bad for you. Things like phytic acid, they actually bind to various different minerals that are in your food and make it so you can't digest it. The iron in the spinach that you're eating, you can't digest it without fermentation. You can't digest it without further things. And that's true with a lot of different things. Magnesium, manganese, there's like a list of like 7 or 8 different ones. It literally binds onto it. So it just goes right through your body. Gluten, tannins, oxalates, lectins, saponins, I don't know how to pronounce that, and isoflavones. They're all things that are generally tolerable in small amounts, some beneficial, but you get a bunch of them, they can wreak havoc on your body. So, fermentation, it comes along, it breaks up the phytates, it helps you to digest the oxalates, it does all of these different sorts of things within the food that makes it so all the goodness that is within those vegetables that you are consuming, you can actually absorb. And it's just, absorbing it in your stomach. And you can do that with grains through sourdough. You do a fermentation of the grains and it helps it so that you can actually absorb it. It also gives it that extra umami factor, so that's why the sourdough is so delicious. It's because of the fermentation. With beans, you can soak it with the vinegar. It's better if you can do it with like a apple cider vinegar that's kind of active. It helps with that process. Fermentation is how you can do that with vegetables. A lot of vegetables are very, very not great for you in their natural form. You got to do all kinds of things to them. But anyway, that's the side point. So, and then the last benefit to it, I think it's the last one, we'll find out later, is that your intestines become the new home for all of that, so that you can actually digest it in future consumptions of vegetables. So if you really like cabbage, but you have a hard time digesting it, try having a bunch of sauerkraut, and then, just have a little bit with each meal, and you'd be surprised how much better you can actually digest it. It works with all of them. It doesn't have to be like sauerkraut for broccoli and kimchi for Napa cabbage. It's like, they're all kind of interchangeable. Just get a big variety of it. And if you don't like fermented foods, just try a different one. Every single person has their gateway. My husband, when I first met him, absolutely detested fermented foods. He would not come anywhere near me if I had consumed fermented foods. He would not let me ferment it in the areas that we were in. I had to have like a special separate fermentation area, and he did not want to smell it. It was awful. He hated the stuff. But then he found curtido. And he is now just as addicted to fermented foods as I am. He consumes probably more kombucha than I do. He has that on everything that he eats. He makes sure to put fermented foods on it. And it was just because I found that one thing after probably 8 years of him absolutely detesting it. He finally found one he liked. And then he asked me to make it for him, and I was like, you bet. And I made a bunch of that, and then I made a business so he can have an unlimited amount of curtido. But all of these different things, you got sauerkraut, kombucha, pickles, kimchi, all forms of alcohol, fish sauce, soy sauce, miso, beer, cheese, yogurt, sourdough bread, cottage cheese, tempeh, vinegar, water kefir, milk kefir, you name it, there is something out there that you or your loved one will enjoy. And that is just the start. Once they find something they like, they're going to inoculate their gut with all of those really good bacteria, and they're going to start to crave even more and more, and they're going to expand everything that they enjoy. Like, I'm telling you, I've seen it work miracles. I'm still working on my son, but someday I will get there. So let's start some sauerkraut, shall we? Okay. We have actually 2 demos. I'm going to be doing sauerkraut, and then a little bit we're going to be doing a brine fermentation. So I'm going to put on some gloves only because you do not need gloves. Just wash your hands. But I don't want to have salty cabbage hands for the rest of this presentation. So I brought some gloves with me. And I'm going to show you how easy it is. There are many different ways that you can do this. This is just simply the way that I like to do it. You get yourself a bowl, and you get yourself a head of cabbage. This is probably about the size of a head of cabbage that will fit in a quart-sized jar. I like to make things really easy, and this is what they had at Walmart yesterday. So just take off the outer couple leaves. You want to kind of set them aside, because you might need them later. You will need them later. I don't know why I'm saying might. All right. Then, see if I can do this at a weird angle so y'all can see. I want to make sure you guys can see what I'm doing. This is also a Walmart knife. Lovely. So you just you're going to cut up the cabbage. I'm not going to give you guys a detailed how to cut cabbage presentation here. I should have sharpened this before I left the house, huh? Okay, so you want to cut out the core. I still use the core because the core actually has a tremendous amount of the fibers and a lot of the good things that your bacteria are going to want. So you just cut it up. I'm really not doing this like how I would do it normally. We're going for speed here because it's cold. Throw it in a bowl. Try not to cut my finger off. This knife is so dull. Okay, here we go. And with the core, the reason that I cut it out and keep it separate is because it is incredibly fibrous, and it's just not pleasant. So I cut it up. Actually, when I'm making it for the Crunchy Cultures jars, I actually run it through a food processor and I grate it to make sure it's nice and small. But I like to make sure to include it because it really does help with the fermentation. So we'll just pretend I'm cutting this up real small, and then put it in the bowl, right? Let's see if I can get this one really quick. And then I like to cut it like that. I just cut it in half, and then once I cut it up, I cut up in half again. Just because I don't like spaghetti, I like sauerkraut, so I like to be a little small. There we go. That should do it. Now, the only thing that you might have to add to this is salt. there is kind of a specific amount that you should add to make sure that you get a good product in the end, because nobody wants to do their first sauerkraut and have it not turn out, right? So the best way that you can do it is to weigh it. I know that's annoying, but everybody's got a kitchen scale, and it is incredibly easy once you wrap your head around the simplicity of the math. It is just a 2 to 3% ratio. So if you weigh this, let's say, and you have 1,000 grams of cabbage, this is going to be more than 1,000 grams, but just for easy math, it's 1,000 grams, right? So 1,000. You just take the decimal point, move it over, right? 2 points. So you got 10, right? Double it. So you're gonna, if you have 1,000 grams of cabbage, you're gonna put 20 grams of salt, 20 to 30. There's a ratio, but you do want to make sure you get at least 2%. It is absolutely required to do the 2%. You cannot skip out on the salt. It will be nasty, it will be mushy, and remember the previous slide where it has to be acidic and salty? You need the salt. It is what precludes all the nasty stuff from going in the first couple days before the acidity takes over. I know it's hard to wrap your brain around. We're told to avoid salt. That's a different discussion for a different talk. So I just got this salt from Walmart last night, and weighing is correct. It is the right way to do it. It is the way that is foolproof, and you will have no issues finding measuring spoons. Here we go. And I measure. I like to make sure, if I'm making it for myself, I'm not gonna lie, I don't measure it, but if I'm making it for my business or if I'm teaching people, weighing it is correct. You can also measure it. A medium-sized head of cabbage is between 1 to 2 tablespoons of salt. And I'm gonna show you guys in just a moment how you can tell, is this the right amount of salt? It's really easy. So we're gonna start out with 1, and then you're just gonna kind of massage it. I like to kind of knead it almost like you're kneading bread. And just a little bit. There are 2 different ways that you can do it. You can just kind of knead it in enough to where you start to see it glisten. Like it almost looks like it's got dew on it. It's starting to, the salt is starting to pull the liquid out of the cabbage. That's what I do. I cover it and then I set it aside for a few hours, come back, it's got a lot of juices extracted from it, and that's the easiest way to do it. Some people like to torture themselves and just sit here and beat on it for 10 minutes. If that you want to do that, and or if you're in a hurry and you just want to make it really quick, that's the way to speed it up. But we're going to do kind of hybrid of that today. I'm just going to kind of mix it in a little bit, and then we're going to come back in about 20 minutes and jar it up, because that's all the time we have for today. So the way that you can tell if you have the right amount of salt is literally just to grab a piece. Once you kind of get it mixed in a little bit, grab a piece. Does it taste like a salted potato chip? That's it. I'm not going to chew this on the microphone, that's gross. Sorry, hang on. That'd be so loud. I have hardcore misophonia, so it's like, okay. We're going to set that aside and continue on with the talk, and then we'll come back to it and jar it up so I can show you how quickly it extracts the liquid. That part's super important. Okay. Oh, I had handy diagram. Anybody wants to take a picture of that? That is the ratio of the salt. I forgot I added that in at the last minute last night. So it sounds confusing, but it's literally like you're just over here and you got the 1,000 grams of salt, pretend the decimal point's right there. You literally move it over and then double it. It's really that simple. And I know that a lot of people are opposed to the metric system, but you know, it's so much easier in this particular instance. Everybody got the picture? You're still taking it?
Does temperature matter?
Yes, we'll be discussing that at the end. But yes, temperature is important to have a range, but you want to be within certain parameters.
Can you put too much salt?
Did you get it? Okay, perfect. All right. So, what stops people from actually fermenting? These are the four different things that I hear from people all the time. Y'all know I work at markets, I do all kinds of festivals, I got a YouTube channel. I hear a lot of people talking about fermentation. It is literally the passion of my entire life. I feel it from every core of my being. Fermentation is why I was set on this earth to exist. So I talk about it a lot. The number one thing is time. They feel like they don't have enough time to do it. Y'all saw that. It didn't even take 2 minutes and we got sauerkraut made. Fear of failing. And to that I say, so what if you fail? I fail. I still fail. Like just probably two or 3 months ago, I had to toss an entire 30-pound batch of sauerkraut because it didn't ferment quickly enough. I'm held to a higher standard with all these time frames and I have to test a lot of different things and all those sorts of things. I never would have thrown it away if it was in my own kitchen, but sometimes it'll get mold on it. Sometimes it'll be a little wonky. Oh well, you just learn your lesson and take it from there. Fear of failing is not a big deal. The nice part about fermentation is that if anything goes wrong with it, you will know. You will absolutely know. There's nothing hidden. There are no secrets in fermentation. There's no guessing. If it's bad, it's bad. Also that it is confusing. The main thing about fermentation that is confusing, I like to think of it as the simplicity of fermentation is confusing to people because it really is so simple. There are just very few different things that you have to kind of keep in mind, but you hear all of these different things. You have to do this, you have to cover it, you have to make sure it's covered with a cloth, or do I cover it with a towel, do I cover it with a fancy lid, do I do this, do I do that? They're all correct. The only thing that I would say is not correct is if you are fermenting vegetables, for God's sake, don't put a cloth on top of it, put a lid on it. That is the only thing. And if you're making kombucha, cover it with a cloth, not a lid. Like, it's basically, that's pretty much the only basic principle that I see sometimes out there. And I should say, if you do cover sauerkraut with a cloth, you're not gonna die, it's just gonna mold. So you'll know it's gone bad. But everything that you hear is most likely correct. It's just the way that they like to do it. It's the way that they have found success with it. And I'm the same. I teach people the way that I like it. I teach people the way that I have found success with it because I want others to be successful. But it's not a hard, fast rule. There are so many different things. They're all correct. So don't be overwhelmed by the amount of information out there. Find somebody you connect with. Find somebody who's teaching you that you vibe with and follow their advice. Simple as that. So, fermentation safety. As I mentioned earlier, I'm afraid I'm gonna die is the number one response that people tell me constantly. I just had somebody at the farmer's market just last week, and she was talking about how she had it and it was ready and she was just terrified to consume it. And I just try and talk people down from it because it is one of the safest things that you can possibly do, and I'm gonna show you why, okay? All right, so most of us are conditioned to be fearful of botulism in fermentation. Botulism is the Mac Daddy. It ain't nothing to mess with. You don't want to toy with it, but you're not going to come anywhere near it when you're fermenting. So I definitely was. When I first started fermenting, I made and threw away probably 7 different batches of ferments before I finally got the courage to try it. I was scared. I thought I was going to kill myself or I was going to kill my family. It's there. But anyways, so I had to know what the truth was. So I went to the source, the CDC website. I checked it, I counted it, and I've compiled a list for us of all the weird ways that people get botulism. From 2001 to 2019, so what's that, like an 18-year thing? Subject to my ability to count, which I can assure you a bunch of lines on a paper, that is how I did this. There were, in that 18-year period, in that period, there were 353 cases of botulism. Foodborne botulism, I should say. There are different forms of botulism. 353 in that entire period. That is an average of 18.58 cases per year in the entirety of the United States with a population of over 300 million. So while it is a serious thing, it is not a common thing. It is not something that just grows, on its own. So there were 27 unknown cases. There were 22 from home cooking, almost exclusively people cooking something, usually a potato, leaving it on the counter for 4 days, and then thinking it was a good idea to eat it. That's usually how it happens. There were 2 from deer antler tea, 1 from 20 from gas station nacho cheese, not exaggerating, 9 from hot dog chili sauce, 37 from prison hooch, 16 at a single event 16 from chili at a single event in 2001, and 16 from commercially processed foods. There were 106 from meat products, almost exclusively Alaskan Inuit fermented foods. Oh, I don't know if they're fermented, but they sound fermented. Stink head, stink fish, stink eggs, Eskimo salad with whale oil, aged whale, beaver tail, all kinds of delicious sounding things. That's how you get botulism. And there were 100 from home canned foods, 27 of which were a single church potluck from improperly home canned potatoes. And there were 7 from fermented foods, but 6 of those were a fermented bean curd or tofu, which if you've looked into the process of how to make that, it has absolutely nothing to do with vegetable fermentation. You cook the products and you add something back to it, typically some kind of a fungus or a mold, and you use that to make it. Completely different process. And there was one suspected case from kimchi back in 2011. It was suspected, it was never actually tested to be found in it, and is the only one in existence in the entire history of the CDC. So, moral of the story. Don't eat anything that begins with stink. Avoid gas station hot whole foods. Just say no to alcohol in prison. Your countertop is not cold storage. Toss the bulging can of food. Think twice before eating potato salad at the church potluck. And for heaven's sake, please, for the love of God, follow proper canning guidelines. It's a legit thing, I promise. So, that is basically the summation of botulism in fermented foods. It doesn't exist. So based on the stats, fermented foods are far safer than raw veggies, nacho cheese, and chili. So I, the other day, decided to have a conversation with Brock because I was curious, as a fermented foods manufacturer, I was curious about the history of it, and particularly in regards to fermented foods manufacturing and recalls. Okay, I won't read it all for you, but where's my mouse? There we go. From 2000, I tried to find back to 2000 because that's kind of when the internet started, you know, but the thing wasn't having it, and it said I can't really find anything beyond 2010. So after that, I had to start my searches in 2010. That's why I started then. There have been 4 recalls on fermented foods in the history of it, and these are not individual, but they are lots, like many, recalls of them. Every single one says that it was contaminated from something else. Did not go wrong in the fermentation. It says fermented foods are generally resistant to such pathogens due to their acidity, but contamination likely occurred post-fermentation during packing and handling. Every single one says some variation of that. It says it is not anything to do with the fermentation. And there were, I think it was Salmonella and Listeria. There were 2 different ones, and 4 since 2010. There was something else important on there, but I don't remember what it was, so we'll move on to the next one. Oh, that's what it was. For reference, these are all of the food recalls from all manufacturers in the United States by the year, and again, these are individual recalls. They're not like, that's all the number of people, and that's not how many people got sick. That's just, we did a test, something went wrong, and we need to take that food back. That's basically what it was. So, of all of those numbers, there were 4 from fermented foods. So why are there so few recalls on fermented foods? Lactofermentation produces organic acids that inhibit pathogens, making sauerkraut and kimchi inherently safer than raw vegetables or other processed foods. Studies cited in fermentation literatures note pathogen elimination with days under proper conditions. So if you do have a vegetable that is contaminated with something, the best way that you can do it is to ferment it, and it will all be gone. Like, that's genuinely how it works. Just the good guys that are on those particular vegetables, they consume the bad guys, and you got nothing to worry about. Like, people that generally do it, I'm not saying that, like I said, not medical advice. But, this basically says that there's not a single case involved with a recall of commercially manufactured foods where somebody got sick from fermented foods. However, there were, where is that at? There were 1.92 million cases of food poisoning and 45,000 deaths. Not a single one was from fermented foods. So, hopefully that helps you to eat what to think, all of those things. This is an excerpt from a study that I forgot to actually cite on here. My apologies for it, but it says the brain and the gut are so intimately connected that a person's stomach or intestinal distress can be the cause or the product of anxiety, stress, or depression. Fun, huh? When you got a lot of issues like that, it's kind of fun to try and figure out what it is. But you got things like butterflies in your stomach. When you're kind of excited or nervous about things, you get butterflies in your stomach. It's coming, and then you get gut feelings or you get a gut instinct. It's all just intertwined. They are completely connected. And when you have something called gut dysbiosis, you have an imbalance. You have a lot of nasty stuff, not so many good stuff. A lot of bad stuff can happen. Lack of energy, brain fog, sensory issues, depression, anxiety, digestion issues, a nearly endless list. Caused by a lot of these sort of different things. There are a lot of different ways that you can get dysbiosis, and some of them might not even be your issue. If you live next to a commercial massive power line, or you eat bad food, poor sleep habits, you got something funky growing in your walls, all kinds of things that can contribute to that. But you do have power over it. You can take care of it through fermented foods. It's fantastic. Or you can do all these sorts of things. We're all homesteaders. We're all exposed to these sorts of things, right? You're going out in the morning and taking care of your animals, so you're getting the morning sun, fresh air, dirt and bacteria in your garden. You get good organic garden soil. You're hauling heavy stuff, so you're getting lots of muscles, chasing down chickens. You get your aerobic activity in, and of course the homegrown goodness, right? We're kind of blessed in that regard as homesteaders. Anyone who is or homestead aspiring, it's a great way to work on your body. It's a great way to reclaim your health. It's a great way to use all of those things to ferment foods, or just, to improve your health in general. Brine fermentation. Who wants to learn about brine fermentation? This one is even easier than sauerkraut, okay? I'll clean that up later, I promise. All right, so we're gonna do it with carrots. Just because it's like the easiest thing to get a warm. There we go. Okay, so we're just gonna cram some of these in a jar. Just cut them into whatever size you want. Usually I would do strips, but I forgot before I started cutting, so we're just gonna do these. And I'm just gonna do enough to show you what we're talking about here. All right, carrots are pretty high in sugar, so you don't want to cut them up into too small of pieces because it'll ferment really fast, which is, it's important, but it's not something we're going to discuss today. So we'll pretend that this jar is about right at the start of when it starts to kind of curve up, right? You want to leave it more room than when you're canning because it's going to grow. So, it's going to grow through carbon dioxide. Not so much with carrots, but cabbage and stuff. Leave a good amount of room, otherwise it's just going to push everything out of the jar. But this one, not so important. So, the way that you mix up the brine, I just now realized I forgot to bring water. So, okay. So basically, the correct ratio is very easy when you're doing brine fermentation. Oh, you got water? You're my hero. Thank you so much. So you take a pint-sized jar and 1 tablespoon of salt. This is all the ratio that you need. I usually like to do a bit of a heaping tablespoon just to be safe, but the 2% is tablespoon of salt, put it in your jar, right? Take the water that was donated by these lovely folks up front, and just get it mixed up however you can. We'll just use our measuring spoon here. Sometimes when you're on the road, you realize you forget stuff, and it's all right. Okay, so we'll pretend that's mixed up. And fill it up. I do have more well water. If you need well water, I brought some. It's in my booth. I did come prepared. I just didn't prepare all the things I brought. So we'll pretend that this is full, right? And remember, 1 pint, so that's 2 cups of water, right? And 1 tablespoon of salt. That's what you need to make everything that you add brine to. I can't even tell you how many thousands of gallons of this brine that I have made with this exact ratio, and it's a ratio. If this thing was full, it would probably take about 1 of these. It usually takes about half of the amount of brine for whatever you're making. So if you're making a whole gallon, you're probably going to use about a half a gallon of brine. That's usually how it works, but it's not always perfect. And then you just pour it on there to cover. That's it. Set that on the counter or in your fermentation station, whatever you would like to do, and you just let it ferment until it tastes the way that you like it. There is no exact amount of time that you need to ferment this for. There is ideals. There's certainly ideals. Usually between about 3 to 6 weeks, you're going to get peak probiotic content, but you're also going to get something that tastes pretty darn acidic. Not everybody is a fan of that, and that's totally fine. That's the beauty of making it on your own. You can make it as acidic or not, however you choose to make it, that is how you make it. When it tastes like you like it, it's done. Flat out. There is nothing else beyond that. You're not going to be in danger if you consume this thing after 2 days, and if there's no mold on there, you're not going to be in danger if you consume it at 3 or 4 months. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. If you keep your eye on it, make sure it's not growing mold, that is all you really have to worry about. It's really that simple, it's really that safe. As far as what you're going to put on top of this, it is a little bit important, but not crazy important. You can take just a standard mason jar lid, go over 4 jars and get a pack of them, throw them on top here, close it, and you're good to go. If you do it that way, you're going to have to relieve some of the pressure that's going to build up inside of there, because the fermentation creates CO2, like the bubbles that you have in soda. It creates that, right? And so if you have that lid cranked on there, which is what you're going to need to do, every couple days, come here, just open it, close it. I forgot lids, so I can't do that. I have these lids. I have fermentation lids. I brought all my fancy crap. Okay, so if you have pretend this is just a regular canning jar, right? Canning lid. You just put on there, literally like that, every couple days, every day to 2 days for about the first 2 weeks. And then after that, just set it and forget it. You don't even need to think about it until it's ready. Okay? That's all you really need. But there are all kinds of fancy tools and gadgets that you can acquire, but I do not recommend buying them until you get started. Get started with it, because if you wait for this to come, if you wait to decide which ones that you want to buy on Amazon, you ain't gonna do it. So just use the mason jar, use what you have. I legitimately used a boiled rock for the first 2 years that I had it, until I discovered mason tops. Let's see if we can get the wind to stop here, guys, sorry. So, do not wait. Get started before you go and find whatever tools and equipment that you want, okay? You do not need any of them. They're just very helpful, okay? They're just helpful. So you got things like this. It's just like some weird thing that you put over the jar, and it's got like a one-way valve on there. So it lets the pressure out but doesn't let the air in. And then there's also these ones that go on the inside of the jar. We got a whole goodie bag here, you guys. And then you got these here lids that have this little hole in it. It's got this funky little thing, and you put it on top and you fill it with water. It does that. And then of course, the classic, the mason tops. This one is my favorite, I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little biased. But that's the one that I like the most, because you literally just put it on top of your thing, standard canning ring, and you're good to go. You literally don't have to do absolutely anything at all. It's that simple. That's why I like this one. It's readily available, it's awesome. Then, they come in kits as well that has this little weight that'll weigh it down and keep everything underneath the oxygen, which I'll show you when we do the sauerkraut, is very important. But there's all these different tools and gadgets. Every single one of them does exactly the same thing. It allows the pressure to be released, but it's a one-way valve, so it doesn't let the oxygen back in. Oxygen is not the most important part of it, it's the mold that comes in on it. It's got little mold spores that will settle inside of your jar, right? So as long as you keep the oxygen out, you should be good to go. Hopefully that'll make sense to you. Hang on. I think I hit something in there. Okay, so fermentation. Is it a magic pill? Absolutely, 100,000% it is not a magic pill, okay? It is simply a tool that you can use to help to benefit your health, okay? This is how I like to think about it. Bad habits are like Ziploc bags, right? They suck. You're not going to build anything with a Ziploc bag, right? But you have good habits. They're strong. They're stackable. They're awesome. They're bricks. You can build a house out of them. The wolf won't blow down. So good habits. They're like bricks, right? You get a whole big wall of bricks, all your good habits. You're out, you're barefoot, you're in the sun, you're gardening, you're consuming the foods that are right for your body, all of those sorts of things. It's really easy for one of those good habits to drop off, right? It's really easy. You just stop doing one of them. And then all of a sudden all your good habits are just a pile of bricks. The way that I see fermented foods, they're like the mortar that holds all of those other good habits in place. They're just mortar. They're holding everything together. And that's how it is manifested in my life, is that when I'm consuming fermented foods, this is me, my story personally, not giving any medical advice. When I'm consuming a lot of fermented foods, everything else in my life just falls into place. I'm not trying to overstate it. That's just how it's worked out over the last 10 years. When I'm doing good, I'm like, oh, I'm consuming a lot of fermented foods. When I'm going off astray and doing things that I shouldn't be doing, I generally am not consuming fermented foods at that time. So I see it as order to hold all your other good habits in place. Basically, you know, it changes the way your brain works, makes it easier to maintain really good habits, makes you crave healthy foods. That is the most important thing for me, and I know for a lot of people, it's hard to say no to cravings, but when you don't crave the bad stuff, it really makes it so much easier. And that's just how it's been in my life. So, when you're getting started with consuming fermented foods, go slow. Go slow. I'm telling you, don't go too fast, okay? You want it just like a tablespoon or two with each meal. I do recommend it with each meal for most people. And then see how you feel. If you're good, you got no issues, you know, add a little more and a little more and a little more. And that is because fermented foods are incredibly strong. They're a very powerful thing that you can put into your body. When you consume a lot of them, it is going to feel awful in your intestines. And it is not that you're getting sick, it is not that you have damaged yourself, it is simply because all of those really good probiotics, bacteria, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They are going to war. And if you have gut dysbiosis, if you have all kinds of funky bad pathogens in your body, it's got a lot to fight, and you're gonna feel it. It's just gonna, oh my gosh, you're gonna be just doubled over. It's gonna be bad. Basically gonna feel like an episode of Game of Thrones in your belly, okay? I'm not exaggerating, I promise you. And that is called a Herxheimer reaction. Yes, it's named after the dude who had to have a really weird name who discovered this thing. It is basically a healing crisis. There's nothing wrong with it. It will absolutely pass, but if you want to avoid the misery of the Herxheimer reaction, go slow. I'm telling you, just go slow. So, how do I recommend that people incorporate fermented foods, or how do I incorporate fermented foods? Very easy. I just add a couple tablespoons to every meal. Like literally, you just, whatever you're cooking, add it to it. There is a fermented food that will taste good with everything, I promise you, and you will find the ones that you enjoy. Literally just add a couple tablespoons, and that's all you have to do. Don't overthink it, don't create entire new recipes around it. I mean, if you're a foodie, you can go ahead. But I mean, I eat 1 pound of ground beef a day, 6 eggs, and a giant pile of sauerkraut. That is what I eat throughout the whole day, and that is all I eat. I am the simplest human being in the world. But because fermented foods taste so good, I can do that every single day, and I'm satisfied, I'm happy. You know, like you'll find what works for you. If you're a foodie and you like to create all these amazing things, fermented foods are your gift as a foodie because they are so complex, they are so varied, and they're so delicious. Swap out your soda for a kombucha. Throwing in a plug here, but I happen to have kombucha over there. Make your own dressings with the brine. Never throw away the brine. You might think it's just like extra pickle juice. It is not. It is an absolute packed powerhouse of amazingness. A lot of people might even say the brine has more in it than the actual vegetables. I'm trying to rush through this because I know I'm done. Okay, you can make a brine with your brine. Make yogurt or milk kefir, trade out the yeast for the sourdough. We are really at the end here, folks. Okay, and then we're gonna make the sauerkraut. What is lacto-fermented? I wanna make sure that everybody understands it has nothing to do with milk. It is not milk. The first 2 years I avoided every recipe that I found that said lacto-fermented because I thought it was milk and I'm lactose intolerant, so I didn't do it. So, it is simply referring to lactic acid bacteria. Nothing to do with milk, for anybody thinking that. Does it have to be perfect? No, absolutely nothing has to be perfect. There's simply things that you can follow and should follow, and things that don't matter. Oh yeah, absolutely not. All right, does salt matter? Yes, it does. It is not as important as most people like to say it is, but it is important, okay? Try and get something that is pure salt. This is just pink Himalayan salt. I made sure before I bought it. A lot of salts have iodine, which is antimicrobial. You want to avoid that one for sure, and a lot of different salts have anti-caking agents in them. Avoid them just because they can hinder the fermentation process. You're not going to kill everything, but it will hinder it and make it go a little bit slower. So just get some good salt. Does water matter? Absolutely. If you have city water, I'm really sorry for you, but filter it. I have well water, so I never think in my videos to actually tell people to filter your water because I haven't had to filter my water in many, many years. But if you have city water, filter it. Otherwise, get spring water. And if you can avoid it, avoid distilled water and reverse osmosis water if it has not been remineralized. It will take the minerals out. It's just something weird with the science. Does temperature matter? Absolutely. Vegetable ferments are ideal, in my opinion, between 65 to 70 degrees. You can go as high as 75, but it makes the fermentation move faster. All that happens is the hotter it gets, the faster the ferment, and the limper your end vegetables will be because it's really speeding it up and it's breaking down a lot of the stuff in there. Do you have to use organic produce? No, I rarely use organic produce. It will ferment just fine. It's ideal, I mean, especially if you have the ability to procure them. I don't because they're literally twice the cost, and I don't garden right now, so I don't get organic. Can you use dehydrated vegetables? Yes, you just have to make a few conditions to it, and you know, if you're curious about that, you can come in later and ask me because I'm running out of time here. Can you use frozen food? Not really, unless you're making like a hot sauce or something like that that's going to be pureed, because it's just going to be a mushy pile of goo, so don't bother trying. Can you use canned foods? No, not at all. Never, please, I beg you don't do it. I have done it. It is revolting, absolutely revolting. It's terrible. Can you cook with the ferments? Absolutely. I like to say variety is the spice of life. You want to have stuff that is fermented for a little bit of time, a long time. You want to have stuff that's cooked, stuff that's not cooked. The more variety you have, the better. How do I know if it's gone bad? This is the important part. Mold is furry. If it's moldy, don't eat it. Throw it away. Give it to your chickens, your pigs, or your compost, whatever you want to do. If you got that mold on there, I cannot in good conscience recommend that, and a lot of people will tell you to scrape it off. I know far too much about microbiology to encourage you to do that. If it molds, I encourage everybody to toss it. And you can tell it's moldy because it's furry. There's something else that'll grow on there that's not furry that's perfectly fine. It will smell rancid. If you guys, any of you gardeners out there who have ever smelled your compost pile when you didn't put enough carbon in it, that's what it smells like. Rancid, awful. This is something called calm yeast. You can see that it's got bubbles to it. It's got like all these lines to it. It's kind of chalky, looks a little oily. Perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with it. If you let it overgrow, it will make it taste a little bit bitter. So you do want to scrape it off when you see it. But once it's there, it's not going anywhere. It will continue to grow even if you scrape it off. Just pop it in the fridge and it'll stop. There's nothing wrong with it, I assure you. Just scrape it off and you're good to go. Do I need to follow a recipe? Absolutely not. Every single recipe that I have ever made is my own recipe. Not really. I do follow some recipes, but I don't actually follow them. Just make what you want. Avoid certain sulfuric vegetables like broccoli until you've gotten started and you feel like experimenting. I've never experimented with broccoli because it sounds awful. But you avoid a few vegetables. Understand that high sugar vegetables, beets, carrots, are going to make the fermentation go quicker, and the lower sugar vegetables are not. It's all a ratio. The temperature, the time, the salt amount, it's all going to determine how long it goes and the quality of the ferment. There's nothing else really beyond that. And that's my handles. If anybody wants to follow me on YouTube, you can. And if you want to follow us along on our journey, you can as well. If you guys don't mind, we're just going to take like 5 seconds and pack the sauerkraut into this jar, and then we'll be good to go. If anybody has any questions while I'm doing this, we have I think we've got probably about 10 minutes where we can do some Q&As. What's that? When you cook with it, how do you not lose the probiotics? You do lose the probiotics. But there are a lot of benefits beyond just probiotics with fermented foods, and there are a lot of different studies out there that show equal health outcomes with raw stuff versus cooked stuff. So that's why I'm saying you want to have a variety of it. You do lose the live bacteria, but there's a ton of other benefits to it. So we obviously did not let this go for enough time. Usually I'll make some of this ahead of time and I'll lift it up and it's just going to be oozing with liquid, but not this time. So how long do I normally leave this for? Usually 2 to 3 hours. Yes. Oh. The sauerkraut that's on the shelf in the stores is going to be the stuff that's been cooked. It's been heat processed. The stuff that is in the refrigerated section, it's hit or miss whether it's been pasteurized or not. Basically, you'd have to look up the company. There are several companies. I don't want to trash anybody, but there are a lot of companies out there who are believed because they're in the refrigerated section that they're not pasteurized. A lot of them are. You just have to look into the company. So basically, you just put it in here. This thing here is called a kraut pounder. There are a lot of different ways that you can do it. This one in particular is for Mason Tops because it comes in the kit. It's called a pickle packer. And this thing is basically just pushing it down. You want to push it down as hard as you can, as you reasonably can to get out all the airspace that's in there. It doesn't really matter if you don't get every single drop out of there. It's not the end of the world because the first part of the fermentation is consuming all the oxygen inside of the jar. Like that's just the first stage of the fermentation. So it doesn't really matter, but it's good to do. And you just keep kind of layering it a bit. I don't usually use a pickle packer. I just use my fist. So if your fist fits inside the jar, you don't need a pickle packer. Don't even worry about it. And you just push it down. I don't know if anybody in the front here can see, but like once you start pushing it down, you kind of start to see some of it, the liquid start to come off of it. This is obviously not going to be continuing beyond today, but this is just for demonstration purposes. I'm going to see if I can get some of the liquid to come out. Push on it with all my might. But usually when I'm fermenting, it's like giant, like 3-gallon batches. We're actually about to jump up to about 25-gallon batches. That should be fun. I have no idea how we're going to do that, but all right, there we go. Can you guys in the front see? Yeah, it just gets like the liquid. Usually it's really easy to do when you let it set for a couple hours or you just beat it to death for 10 minutes. But that's basically what you're doing. And then you're going to pick whatever style lid that you choose, whether it is a standard Mason Tops lid or whatever it is. Put it on there. What's that? I don't add water. If you let it ferment, the salt pulls the moisture out of the cabbage. There's nothing wrong with adding brine to it. You would just add the same ratio as this. You don't want to add just plain water. You want to add a salted water, the brine. But usually you'd want to make sure to leave a little more room than this. And then the nice part about these little kits that I forgot to put in there, this thing right here. It's perfectly sized to fit inside of here. So if you do decide that you want to continue with fermentation, these kits are fantastic to get. I'm not affiliated with them. I might be someday, but I'm not currently. I'm just obsessed with them and have been for like 5 years. So basically this weight holds everything underneath the brine. And I failed to mention the importance of keeping the vegetables under the brine, especially if you're using a standard canning lid. You want to make sure that literally every single speck, you want to be completely OCD about it, get every single speck off of the surface, because that is where, when you burp the jar and you let the oxygen and the mold in there, that's where it's going to settle, that's where it's going to take hold, and it's going to ruin your jar. If you have one of these lids, right, there's no oxygen coming in. You're not opening it up, you're not allowing oxygen in, so it's not an issue as much. For me, I use water seal crocks. There is literally no issue whatsoever with it. I've never had a problem with water seal crocks, but I didn't bring one today because I would break it. So keeping it underneath the brine is going to keep it from going bad. You need to eliminate the oxygen because you need to eliminate the mold. So if you do, just make sure that you keep everything under the brine. Does anybody have any questions about that or literally anything else while I clean up? Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't find who was talking. And a lid. Yeah, if the weight is not the size of the jar, just cut out this in the shape, and this will tuck everything under. But this thing just happens to be like literally the perfect size, so you don't really have to do that. And it's best if you cut it a little bit wider than what it needs to be, so you can tuck it around the corners, just to make sure you get everything underneath there. Any other questions? Oh, I'll go over the temperature. I like to ferment vegetables between 65 to 70 degrees. You can go as low as 60 and as high as 80. Anything over 80, you're just going to get limp, nasty vegetables. It's going to ferment really quick and go wonky. Then, yeah. I do use the water that's in here. Yes. Yes, you want to. I didn't because it hadn't had time to form yet. I have to rush that, but yes. In the fridge. Once it's done fermenting, you just want it, when it's ready, when it's something that you like, pop it in the fridge and it'll slow the fermentation to the point that it almost stops. But it won't actually stop. It's kind of like fine wine. You're maturing it in the fridge. It will get better with time. I've gone as high as 12. Yeah. Yeah, usually when I have my own ferments, I don't even store it in the fridge. I just keep let it keep going. Any other questions? Amazon and Walmart. I wish I had some like, oh, it was some artisan vendor at some fair I went to. It wasn't. How do I make my curtido? The same exact as this, but I add more ingredients. Jalapenos, carrots, oregano, lime, cumin, jalapeno. I think that's it. I make everything and mix it in the bowl together. And then I let it set, and then I jar it. Anytime you add any other ingredients, I usually do it at the same time, because if I don't, I will forget it. Curtido. The health department makes me put a year on them, but no. The next day. The earliest you can eat it is the next day, but it's just going to taste like raw veggies. Whenever it tastes good, that's when you want to pull it. And then you'd be surprised as time goes on, you're going to enjoy it more and more and more and more fermented. Like if you start consuming fermented foods now, when you like a year from now, you're going to want stuff that's been fermented for like 3 months. It's crazy. What's that?
Thank you.